Locke, A History of Modern Philosophy, Book 8. Epistemology, or theory of knowledge, did not begin in modern times. Among the Greeks, it goes back at least to Empedocles and figures largely in the programs of the later schools. And Descartes' universal doubt seems to give the question, how can we be sure of anything, a foremost place in speculation. But the singular assurance with which the Cartesian metaphysicians presented their adventurous hypotheses as demonstrated certainties showed that with them the test of truth meant whatever told for that which, on other grounds, they believed to be true. In reality, the thing they called reason was hardly more than a covert appeal to authority, a suggestion that the duty of philosophy was to reconcile old beliefs with new. And the last great dogmatist, Leibniz, was the one who practiced this method of uncritical assumption to the utmost extent. It is the peculiar glory of John Locke, 1632 to 1704, to have resumed that method of doubt which Descartes had attempted, but which his dogmatic prepossessions had falsified almost at the first start. This illustrious thinker is memorable not only for his services to speculation, but for the example of a genuinely philosophic life entirely devoted to truth and good, a character in which personal sweetness, simplicity, and charm were combined with strenuous, disinterested, and fearless devotion to the service of the state. Locke was a Whig when Whiggism meant advanced liberalism in religion and politics, and when that often meant a choice between exile and death. Thus, after the fall of his patron, Lord Shaftesbury, the philosopher had to take refuge in Holland, remaining there for some years, lying hid even there for some time to escape an extradition order for which the government of James II had applied. It was in Holland that he wrote the essay concerning human understanding. This revolutionist in thought was no solitary recluse, but in the best sense a thorough man of the world. Educated at Westminster and Christ Church, he had, in the German poet's phrase, the supreme happiness of combining the seriousness of an enthusiast with the sagacity of a statesman, so that great statesmen recognized him as one of themselves. With the triumph of the Whig cause at a time when diplomacy demanded the utmost tact and skill, it was proposed to send Locke as ambassador to the court of Brandenburg, and, as that would not have suited his sober habits, to the court of Vienna. Weak health obliging him to decline this also, he received office in the ministry at home, taking a department where business talents were eminently required. In that capacity, he bore a leading part in the restoration of the coinage, besides inspiring the Toleration Act and the Act for Unlicensed Printing. Even the wisest men make mistakes, and it must be noticed with regret that Locke's theory of toleration excluded Roman Catholics on the one side and atheists on the other, the former because their creed made persecution a duty, the latter because their want of a creed left them no sanction for any duties whatever. To say that Locke had not our experience does not excuse him, for in both cases the expediency of toleration can be proved a priori. Romanists must be expected to suppress a heresy whose spokesman declares that when he has the power, he will suppress their church. And if atheists are without moral principle, they will propagate under cover of orthodoxy negations that they are not allowed openly to profess. Locke was brought up by a Puritan father, and although in after life he wandered far from its doctrinal standards, he no doubt always retained a sense of that close connection between religion and morality which Puritanism implies. Telling about the train of thought that started his great essay, he refers it to a conversation between himself and some friends, in which they found themselves quickly at a stand by the difficulties that rose on every side. And according to an intimate friend of his, the discussion turned on the principles of morality and revealed religion. It then occurred to him that they should first ascertain what objects their understandings were or were not fitted to deal with, and the mottos prefixed to the essay prove that the results were of a decidedly skeptical cast. Indeed, his successors, though not himself, were destined to develop them into what is now called agnosticism. We have further to note that while his continental rivals were mathematicians, our English philosopher never went deeply into mathematics, but was by calling a physician. In this, he resembles Aristotle and Sextus Empiricus among the Greeks, and so it is quite in order that with the same sort of training, he should adopt Aristotle's method of experience as against Platonic transcendentalism, and the skeptical relativism of Sextus as against the dogmatism of the schools. Locke begins his essay with a vigorous polemic against the doctrine of innate ideas. The word idea, as he uses it, is ambiguous, serving to denote perceptions, notions, and propositions. But this confusion is of no practical importance, his object being to show that all our knowledge originates in experience, whereas the reigning belief was that at least the first principles of knowledge had a more authoritative, if not a mystical, source. Hobbes had been beforehand with him in deriving every kind of knowledge from experience, but had been content to assume his case, whereas Locke supports his by a formidable array of proofs. The gist of his argument is that intellectual and moral principles, supposed to be recognized by all mankind from their infancy, are admitted only by some, and by those only as the result of teaching. As we saw, the whole inquiry began with questions about religion and morality, and it is precisely in reference to the alleged universality and innateness of the belief in God and the moral law that Locke is most successful. And the more modern anthropology teaches us about primitive man, the stronger becomes the case against the transcendental side in the controversy. Where his analysis breaks down is in dealing with the difficult and important ideas of space, time, substance, and causality, with the fatal result that such questions as how is experience itself possible? Or how from a partial experience can we draw universal and necessary conclusions? Find no place in his theory of knowledge. Of course, his contemporaries are open to the same criticism, nor indeed had the time come even for the statement of such problems. Meanwhile, the facility with which the founder of epistemology accepts fallacies, whence Spinoza had already found his way out, shows how little he was master of his means. According to Locke, it is a certain and evident truth that there is an eternal, most powerful, and most knowing being, which whether anyone will please to call God, it matters not. On examination, the proof appears to involve two unproved assumptions. The first is that nothing can begin to exist without a cause. The second is that effects must resemble their causes, and from these it is inferred that an all-powerful being must have existed from all eternity. The alternative is overlooked, that a succession of more limited beings would answer the purpose equally well, while it would also be more consistent with our experience. But a far more fatal objection to Locke's theism results from his second assumption. This, although not explicitly stated, is involved in the assertion that for knowledge such as we possess to originate from things without knowledge is impossible. For, on the same principle, matter must have been made by something material, pain by something that is pained, and evil by something that is evil. It would not even be going too far to say that by this logic I myself must have existed from all eternity. For to say that I was created by a not myself would be to say that something may come from nothing. We have seen how Locke refused toleration to atheists on the ground that their denial of a divine lawgiver and judge destroys the basis of morality. He did not, like Spinoza, believe that morality is of the nature of things. For him, it is constituted by the will of God. Possibly, if pressed, he might have explained that what atheism denies is not the rule of right, but the sanction of that rule, the fear of supernatural retribution. Yet being, like Spinoza and Leibniz, a determinist, he should have seen that a creator who sets in motion the train of causes and effects, necessarily resulting in what we call good or bad human actions, has the same responsibility for those actions as if he had committed them himself. To reward one of his passive agents and to punish another would be grossly unjust and at the same time perfectly useless. But how do we know that he will, on any theory of volition, reward the good and punish the bad? Because we have his word for it. And how do we know that he will keep his word? Because he is all good. But that, on Locke's principles, is pure assumption. And God, being quite sure that he has no retribution to fear, must be even more irresponsible than the atheist. The principle that nothing can come from nothing, so far from proving theism, leads logically either to pantheism or to a much more thorough monadism than the system of Leibniz. And metaphysics apart, it conflicts with a leading doctrine of the essay. That is the fundamental distinction between the primary and the secondary qualities of matter. We think of bodies as in themselves extended, resisting and mobile, but not in themselves as coloured, sonorous, odorous, hot, cold, or sapid. They cause our special sensations, but cause them by an unknown power. Again we perceive, or think we perceive, both primary and secondary qualities in close union as properties of a single object, and this object in which they jointly inhere is called a substance. And to the question, what is substance? Locke admits that he has no answer except something we know not what. He has returned to the agnostic standpoint of the Cyrenaic school. This something, for aught we know, might have created the world. Continental historians regard the whole rationalistic movement of the 18th century, or what in Germany is called the Enlightenment, Aufklärung, as having been started by Locke. But the sort of arguments that he adduces for the existence of a God prove that in theology at least his rationalism had rather narrow limits. Both his theism and his acceptance of Christianity on the evidence of prophecy and miracles show no advance on medieval logic. In this respect, Spinoza and Bale, 1622 to 1709, were far more in line with the modern movement. Still, assuming Scripture as an authoritative revelation, Locke shows that, rationally interpreted, it yields much less support to dogmatic orthodoxy than English churchmen supposed. And whatever may have been the letter of his religious teaching, there can be little doubt that the English deists, Toland, Shaftesbury, and Anthony Collins, represented its true spirit more faithfully than the philosopher himself. Representative government and the subordination of ecclesiastical to secular authority, or better still, their separation, are both good things in themselves and favorable conditions to the life of reason. Another condition is that children should be trained to exercise their intelligence instead of relying blindly on authority. In these respects, also, Locke's writings acted powerfully on the public opinion of the next century, especially through the agency of French writers. France, as Macaulay justly claims, being the interpreter between England and the world. Our present business, however, is not with the diffusion, but the development of thought, and to trace this we must return to British philosophy.